Part 1. The Young King Shining in Versailles' Glory. In 1715, the glittering halls of Versailles, once the stage for Louis XIV's unmatched power, witnessed a pivotal moment. The Sun King, who had ruled France for an astonishing 72 years, passed away, leaving behind a nation battered by wars and debt. The throne fell to his 5-year-old great-grandson, Louis XV, a moment both dazzling and uncertain. The French people pinned their hopes on this orphaned boy, dreaming he'd steer France out of its dark past into a new era of prosperity. They nicknamed him Louis the Well-Beloved, not just for his innocent charm, but for the belief he'd bring renewal to a weary nation. Yet beneath the sparkle of Versailles, dark schemes were already brewing, poised to shape the fate of this young king and France. Orphaned by disease, Louis XV grew up under the care of regents, notably Philippe d'Orléans, who governed France during the boy's early years. Under Philippe's rule, France saw a brief period of openness, with economic reforms aimed at recovering from Louis XIV's costly wars. But Versailles wasn't just a school for a future king, it was a political battlefield. Nobles, sensing a chance to control the young monarch, wove secret plots. A document uncovered years later revealed a cabal of aristocrats scheming to surround Louis with loyal advisors to secure their own power. Whispers of these power struggles echoed through the palace's gilded corridors, hinting at a reign already teetering on instability. Despite his youth, Louis XV was groomed to be a true king. Top European scholars taught him languages, history, math, military tactics, and diplomacy. They marveled at his sharp mind and remarkable memory. One story tells of the 5-year-old stunning his tutors by reciting Alexander the Great's battle strategies, sparking excitement across the court about his potential. The French people, exhausted by the rigid final years of Louis XIV's rule, looked to the boy king with hope. Poems and paintings of the time portrayed him as a little angel, a symbol of rebirth, destined to lead France to a new golden age. By 1723, at age 13, Louis XV took the reins of power, and the nation held its breath. Described as a handsome teen with bright eyes and a charming smile, he seemed born to rule. Versailles' lavish ceremonies, with golden mirrors reflecting the court's splendor, amplified his aura. Crowds cheered wildly whenever he appeared, convinced he'd fix past mistakes and restore France's glory. But even in these promising early days, cracks emerged. Courtiers noted Louis's hesitation in making decisions, often swayed by conflicting advice. One tale recounts him ignoring a seasoned official's counsel in favor of a close friend's advice, prompting older nobles to shake their heads in concern. Behind the glamour, Versailles was a maze of ambition and intrigue. Nobles, exploiting Louis's youth, spread whispers to divide the court. Some claimed Philippe d'Orléans, despite his regency, kept Louis naive to cling to power. Secret letters exchanged among powerful families outlined plans to place loyalists in key roles around the king. While the French people outside Versailles hailed Louis the Well-Beloved, they were unaware of the growing rifts within. The dazzling light of Versailles couldn't hide the schemes quietly shaping the young king's destiny and France.
Part 2. A Fleeting Golden Age. Dreams of a New France. The radiant glow of Versailles, which had crowned Louis XV as Louis the Well-Beloved, shone brightly as he took full control in 1723. The young king, with his charm and intellect praised since childhood, seemed poised to fulfill the nation's dreams of renewal. Yet, the seeds of unrest sown during his regency, whispers of courtly schemes and power grabs, began to sprout, threatening the promise of his reign. In this brief golden age, Louis XV aimed to forge a new France, but the shadows of indecision and emerging scandals loomed, foreshadowing a storm that would engulf his legacy. In 1725, at 15, Louis XV married Marie Leszczyńska, a Polish princess, in a grand ceremony at Fontainebleau. The wedding wasn't just a personal milestone, but a bold statement of France's dominance in Europe. Marie, with her gentle beauty and humility, won the court's affection. Witnesses said Louis, usually reserved, beamed as he held her hand, sparking hopes of a lasting partnership. The couple soon welcomed children, securing the royal line, and their portraits painted them as symbols of love and hope. Parisians flooded the streets, singing praises, believing their young king and queen would usher in a brighter era after Louis XIV's draining wars.
Inspired by this adoration, Louis XV showed bold ambitions for reform. He poured funds into science and the arts, making Versailles a cultural beacon. One story tells of him meeting mathematician Émilie du Châtelet, encouraging her to translate Newton's works, a sign of his openness to new ideas. He also ordered a review of the tax system, aiming to ease the burden on commoners and modernize governance. In a council meeting, he declared, "I want France to be not just strong, but fair," words that thrilled the middle class and peasants longing for change. But this golden moment was fleeting. Louis's indecision, noted in his youth, became glaring. He wavered between advisors' conflicting ideas, stalling reforms. A leaked proposal for tax reform sparked outrage among nobles, who guarded their privileges fiercely. An anonymous letter, rumored to be from a disgruntled council member, accused Louis of being manipulated by close aides, echoing the courtly plots of his regency. Whispers of his weakness spread, chipping away at public trust. The arrival of his first mistress added fuel to the fire. A young noblewoman, rumored to be Louis's secret lover, appeared at Versailles' lavish balls, stirring gossip. Though unconfirmed, her presence strained his marriage to Marie and sparked public chatter about his morals. A satirical song, sung in Paris taverns, mocked the young king who loves romance more than the throne. These scandals, though minor, tarnished the perfect image Louis had built, angering conservative nobles who feared he was straying from duty. Meanwhile, court intrigues intensified. Advisors loyal to the old regency schemes maneuvered to place allies near the king. A stolen document from a council meeting revealed nobles plotting to block reforms to protect their wealth. Though the plan failed, it deepened the distrust in Versailles, where loyalty was tested by ambition. Louis, full of good intentions, seemed blind to the web of power tightening around him. This brief golden age with dreams of a fair and thriving France was overshadowed by internal conflicts. Versailles, once a symbol of glory, became a stage for plots and scandals. The cheers for Louis the Well-Beloved still rang out, but beneath the surface, cracks were widening, signaling a reign headed for darkness.
Part 3. Shadows Rise, the Downfall of a King. The dazzling light of Versailles, which had once crowned Louis XV as the hope of France, began to dim as the cracks from his early years widened into chasms. The ambitious reforms and public adoration of his youth were drowned out by catastrophic wars, scandalous affairs, and growing unrest. The whispers of indecision and courtly schemes from his regency and early rule erupted into a storm of failures that shattered the image of Louis the Well-Beloved. From a king of promise, Louis XV descended into a symbol of decadence, dragging France into a spiral of crisis and resentment. Disastrous wars marked a turning point. The War of the Austrian Succession, 1740 to 1748, aimed at countering British power and supporting Prussia, turned into a debacle. Louis XV, eager to prove himself, led troops himself, but his lack of strategy led to crushing defeats. In 1744, a shocking betrayal rocked the court when a senior general was caught plotting to hand over a key fortress for gold. Though hushed up, the scandal shook the military and fueled public doubts about Louis's leadership. The 7 Years' War was even worse, with France losing nearly all its North American colonies, including Canada and Louisiana. In 1757, a failed assassination attempt by a disgruntled ex-soldier exposed deep anger within the ranks. The attacker's public execution did little to quell the growing unrest, signaling a nation turning against its king. Mistress scandals deepened the divide. Madame de Pompadour, more than a lover, became a political powerhouse, steering key decisions. In 1750, a leaked document, allegedly from a bitter courtier, revealed her role in pushing failed military campaigns to boost her influence, sparking outrage among nobles. The arrival of Madame du Barry, a woman of humble origins, fueled wild rumors that she was a foreign spy planted to weaken France. A biting poem passed around Paris called her the snake in the king's heart, tarnishing the monarchy's image. These scandals alienated Queen Marie and turned public adoration into scorn, with many seeing Louis as a morally bankrupt ruler. Public unrest exploded as unfair taxes crushed the poor. While nobles and clergy dodged taxes, peasants and the middle class bore the cost of failed wars. In 1752, a bread shortage triggered a riot in Paris, with desperate crowds storming grain warehouses. The army's brutal crackdown left dozens dead, and a secret pamphlet circulated, branding Louis the king who abandoned his people for pleasure. This event, whispered about in markets and taverns, marked a shift from love to rage. Versailles, with its lavish feasts and glittering halls, became a stark symbol of inequality, starkly contrasting the people's suffering. Court intrigues rooted in the Regency escalated into open power struggles. Nobles opposed to Louis's half-hearted reforms held secret meetings to protect their privileges. An intercepted letter from a powerful lord called for ousting the king's advisors to save the throne. Though the plot failed, it deepened the paranoia at Versailles, where Louis leaned on figures like Pompadour, further distancing himself from reality. Satirical songs and pamphlets spread across Paris, mocking the once beloved king as a weak puppet. The shadows of Louis XV's reign, born from failed wars, scandalous affairs, and suppressed riots, swallowed the promise of his youth. The nation that once cheered him now whispered of betrayal, setting the stage for a reign defined by tragedy.
Part 4. Isolation and Crisis. The Forgotten King. The storm of unrest from Louis XV's failed wars, scandalous affairs, and brutal crackdowns transformed him from Louis the Well-Beloved into a ghost in his own palace. The courtly plots and public resentment that had simmered since his youth now erupted, isolating him in a gilded cage at Versailles. The faith of his people, once as bright as the palace's grand ceremonies, had crumbled into anger and mockery. In this phase, Louis XV retreated from reality, lost in luxury and pleasure, while France sank into economic, religious, and political chaos. The cracks of his early reign had become a gaping abyss, foreshadowing the collapse of both king and crown. Retreating from reality, Louis XV hid away at the Petit Trianon, a private retreat built to escape Versailles pressures. A scandalous tale spread across France. In 1760, as Parisians starved during a crop failure, Louis hosted a 3-day feast at Trianon with lavish dishes and fine wines. A smuggled pamphlet, passed around dark alleys, described the king reveling while children died of hunger. True or not, such stories turned Versailles into a symbol of grandeur, into one of callousness. The king, who once vowed to make France fair, now seemed obsessed with hunting, parties, and personal indulgence, ignoring his people's cries. Religious and political crises deepened his isolation. In 1764, Louis expelled the Jesuit order, a move some saw as progressive, but which enraged traditional Catholics. An anonymous letter, allegedly from an exiled Jesuit, was pinned to Versailles' gates, warning that the throne will fall under God's wrath. Though suppressed, the letter spread fear of divine retribution. Meanwhile, clashes with the Paris Parliament representing nobles and the middle class sparked a constitutional crisis. In 1771, Louis dissolved the parliament, replacing it with compliant courts, after uncovering a plot by rogue members to force him to cede power to a noble council. Seized documents revealed their plan to rescue the monarchy, intensifying distrust at court and pushing Louis further into isolation. The Enlightenment's rise fanned the flames of dissent. Works by Voltaire and Rousseau, though banned, circulated in salons and coffeehouses. A confiscated book from a secret Paris press exposed Louis's abandoned reform plans, painting him as a puppet of his mistresses and advisors. Instead of addressing the criticism, Louis tightened censorship, but this only fueled curiosity about forbidden ideas. A satirical poem, sung in markets, mocked him as the king asleep on his throne, cementing his image as a detached ruler. Court intrigues grew fiercer. After Madame de Pompadour's death in 1764, Madame du Barry's influence sparked outrage. A stolen letter from her chambers, rumored to be sent to a foreign power, fueled suspicions she was a spy. Though unproven, the rumor deepened the chaos at Versailles, with nobles openly decrying the monarchy's decay. Louis, rather than confronting the crisis, retreated deeper into Trianon, pretending France was still under his control. Louis XV's isolation wasn't just personal, it mirrored the growing rift between the monarchy and its people. The cheers for Louis the Well-Beloved were a distant memory. Pamphlets, songs, and whispers of rebellion spread from Paris to the countryside. France, once Europe's powerhouse, teetered on the edge of collapse, led by a king forgotten in his own palace. The failures of his wars and scandals from Part 3 had laid the groundwork.
Part 5. A horrific death, symbol of collapse. From the heights of Versailles' splendor, Louis XV had fallen into a pit of isolation, abandoned by a nation that once adored him. The failed wars, scandalous affairs, and brutal crackdowns of his reign had turned Louis the Well-Beloved into a despised figure. By 1774, his personal tragedy reached its climax with a gruesome death from smallpox, not only ending his rule, but serving as a stark symbol of the monarchy's decay. His agonizing, humiliating end played out amid panic at Versailles, stripped away the last illusions of royal grandeur, mirroring the collapse of the system he embodied. A fateful illness struck in late April 1774 after a secretive hunting trip with Madame du Barry in the Rambouillet forest. Louis returned to the Petit Trianon feverish and aching, symptoms dismissed as exhaustion. The court, fearing unrest, hid his condition, but on April 28th, smallpox telltale pustules erupted on his skin, plunging Versailles into chaos. Smallpox, the terror of the 18th century, had claimed royals before, and its arrival sparked panic. Rumors spread in Paris of a curse on the throne, as crowds gathered, whispering of divine judgment. Terror at Versailles grew as Louis's condition worsened. Pustules covered his body, transforming the once handsome king into a grotesque figure racked with pain. The stench from his sores was so unbearable that even loyal attendants fled. A devoted maid, caring for him, caught the disease and died, intensifying fears of contagion. In a fevered delirium, Louis smashed a silver mirror, unable to face his disfigured reflection, reportedly crying, "I'm no king, I'm a monster." This heart-wrenching moment, recorded by his doctors, underscored his personal collapse. In rare lucid moments, he summoned priests, confessing his failures to his people and begging forgiveness. "I betrayed France," he whispered, but his words were lost in his agony and the court's disarray. Courtly traditions crumbled, ceremonies were cancelled, and nobles fled to avoid infection. Madame du Barry, the powerful mistress of the king, was banished from Versailles in a midnight carriage, ordered out by the royal family. A desperate letter, later found and attributed to her, revealed her anguish at being abandoned. Louis, once surrounded by sycophants, died alone, save for a few dutiful servants and doctors, his final days a stark contrast to his reign's early glory. The collapse of royal ritual marked the monarchy's fall. On May 10, 1774, after nearly 2 weeks of torment, Louis XV died, his body convulsing in its final moments. His corpse, ravaged by decay, couldn't be prepared for a traditional funeral. Embalmers refused to work near the overwhelming stench, and his lead coffin was sealed hastily and rushed to St. Denis, skipping the customary lying in state and grand procession. The funeral was a grim affair, attended by a handful of loyalists, with onlookers showing more curiosity than grief. The public's reaction was the final blow to Louis's legacy. News of his death sparked celebrations in Paris. Taverns rang with mocking songs, one comparing his corpse to Versailles' rotting mountain. A pamphlet plastered across the city declared, "The king is dead and his regime is dying." The joy at his passing, unthinkable in his youth, showed how far the monarchy had fallen. Louis's horrific death, alone and reviled, wasn't just a personal tragedy. It was a vivid symbol of a monarchy crumbling under its own weight. This gruesome end tied back to the failures of his reign, the courtly plots, scandals, and disconnect from his people outlined in earlier parts. It stood as a warning of the rot within the monarchy, paving the way for the upheavals to come.